Hey everyone, today I wanted to take a look at Nuts, sometimes subtitled A Surveillance Mystery. It's a cute little game with a unique premise and rewarding gameplay mechanics, but it does fall short in some key areas. With that said, I don't think there's any need for any more preambles, so let's take a look. In Nuts, you're a research assistant for Dr. Nina Schulz of the Vialgo Institute. You're heading deep into Melmoth Forest, a fictional forest ostensibly in England, to watch and photograph the local squirrel population. While at first it seems like you're just doing routine surveillance on the squirrels' habits, it's quickly revealed that a construction company known as Panorama is planning a large-scale project on the site. And only by proving that the forest is an endangered squirrel habitat can you halt Panorama's scheme. This task is complicated as you make enigmatic discoveries within the forest and observe the squirrels acting a little strangely. But to say any more would be to give it away, and I want this review to stay mainly spoiler-free. The player carries this work out by recording the patterns and movements of various squirrels, reviewing their footage at the end of the day and trying to figure out exactly where the squirrels are going or what they're doing. You do this by placing tripod-mounted cameras along the squirrel's path, starting off with one, but quickly gaining a second and third camera as you complete the easier missions and get used to the game's flow. During the day, you're able to freely explore the forest outside your caravan, hunting down points of interest and moving the cameras around so they're in the right position for when the squirrels emerge. At night, you review the footage captured by your cameras on this refreshingly vintage 3 TV system. Each camera corresponds to a matching TV set, positioned so you can keep track of all of them at once if necessary. This comes in pretty handy on the trickier later levels, where you often have to make educated guesses about where the squirrels are heading, and have to place your cameras as broadly as possible, just trying to get a glimpse of the little guys anywhere you can so you can get a lead. Oh, and don't worry, this isn't like Pikmin, where there's a day limit that you have to get everything done by. Or, if there was, I didn't notice, because it usually takes a maximum of about 4 days to complete a level. So there's no need to worry about that. You can explore the forest and hunt the squirrels down at your own pace. The TVs have everything you need to keep track of the squirrels, with play, pause, rewind, and fast forward options being available at multiple different speeds. This is useful and means you don't have to sit through the same footage at a snail's pace every time you replay. In true CSI fashion, you can also zoom and enhance, focusing in on any little bit of footage that seems interesting or revealing, using a channel changer to flip between cameras. The final gadget in your TV arsenal is a printer, from which you print out a capture of whichever screen you like. You fax these documents through to Dr. Schulz using a scanner. Again, it's delightfully 90s. You can technically send the professor any picture you like, so you're free to get creative. There's even an achievement for it. Another tool that's less integral but still nice to have is your journal. The journal contains information about your current objective, objectives you've already cleared, and has space for you to slot in photos you've taken. This can be useful when you spot a squirrel in a certain area on the TV and then you have to go and line up with your footage exactly where that area is. I used it a couple of times to carry photos around and pinpoint locations so that I could move my cameras accordingly, so it was great to have that option. The last tool is a GPS device that shows the location of your cameras as well as the starting position for the current objective. While this may not seem like the most useful addition, it can get handy once the environments get bigger and you lose track of where you left all your stuff. It also provides a handy place to start over if you get lost or forget where the squirrel was heading. I suppose a meta benefit is that the GPS allows you to keep track of a map without the need for a UI, allowing the player to properly view the scenery without anything getting in your way. Besides the tools, you can run and jump very freely through the environments, which themselves are very amenable to simply being dashed and clambered over. This seems like a bit of a minor thing to comment on, but when you're running back to a surveillance site every day to make little changes to your cameras, it's way more convenient to have scenery that you can traverse with relative ease. Before we move on to gameplay analysis, I should talk about the game's graphical style and visuals. It took me a while to get used to how Nuts looks. The lack of detail in the game's environments felt strange considering we were meant to be in a lush forest, and the flat, vibrant colours were something of a strain to look at first, especially when the day-night cycle suddenly shifts. I haven't edited that, by the way, it just suddenly cuts to a new screen whenever you pass from day to night and vice versa, along with completely different colouring. I was kind of worried that watching this over and over would give me eye strain, but instead it just reminded me of when you go to the opticians and they make you look at that completely flat red and green pattern. You know what I mean? Some of you will, probably. Anyway, it takes a bit of getting used to, but it does have its own kind of charm. It's certainly a distinctive art direction, so I can't fault them for trying something a little different to help this game stand out. Getting back to the gameplay, I love first-person games that let you interact with a ton of little fiddly devices, and Nuts definitely scratches that very specific itch. I love tapping around on the TV sets at the end of every day, and even though you're only really hitting mouse 1, it does feel satisfying to hit one of the dials and see it click around. There are even times when I'd zoom in and navigate right up close to a squirrel for no reason other than it just felt good to do. Click through to the printer, print it out, fax it over to the professor, because she has just such a lovely voice.
Hey, that's not the squirrel we want to track right now. Our furry friends get pretty territorial, so keep your eyes peeled for the right one.
Oh, Nina. I'll impress you one of these days. Anyway, the devices feel good to use. Even moving the camera lens around in the field feels like you're operating on a sophisticated level, and lining everything up, getting the perfect footage and knowing that it's your placements that did it feels great. The squirrels themselves follow a set path every time, going from their nest to their final destination without diverging from it, and your job is to find out exactly what that route is. This means that the game is ultimately about trial and error with camera placements, but there's enough leeway for you to make educated guesses based on the direction a squirrel seemed to be going in on a previous recording. It's also possible to brute force your way to an objective by just running around and exploring the world, which kind of goes against the entire premise of the game and is something I'm not really fond of. You can't do this on every mission, and it's straight up impossible with objectives in which your goal is to locate a specific location and take a picture with the squirrel in frame, so you still have to position your cameras and engage with the game's primary mechanics overall. Later stages are bigger, and later squirrels will, of course, take trickier paths and throw you off, so your opportunities to effectively cheat the game are vastly reduced. That said, I did find the penultimate objective almost entirely on my own, and I just tested this. You can simply find your way through the last mission and complete the game without even needing to watch the squirrel. Granted, I didn't do this on my first playthrough. I set up the cameras, mapped out the squirrel's entire route, and felt a sense of reward and pleasant surprise upon finding out exactly how this final path mapped out. It's not the most obvious route in the world, so I bet other people who played the game would just do the same thing I did. However, given that this is an indie game, and its main selling point is the squirrel watching mechanic, it's a little weird that you can just circumvent having to use it if you're creative and explore enough. That said, if you had to work out a specific route bit by bit to the point at which you have to just find every single inch of the squirrel's path in one particular order, Nuts would just end up being more of an exercise in box ticking than a game. So I do think it's a good thing for the game to be a little loose in how you have to find your way to its objectives. It's just kind of weird that you don't have to use its main selling point to win sometimes. And speaking of time consuming, we should probably discuss a particularly sizable elephant in the room. At the time of me recording this, Nuts is £15.49 on Steam, or $20 if you're American. For that money, you get a maximum of 3 hours playtime. At least, that's what I've seen other reviews estimate their playtime as. I was able to get through the game in about 2 hours according to Steam's tracker, but speedrunning websites don't have a category for this game yet, so I didn't submit it. Value is a completely subjective thing, and I was happy to pay full price, knowing that the money was going to a tiny indie studio that made a novel mechanic and built a game around it. But that said, £15 for 2 and a bit hours of gameplay for a story-based game I don't intend on replaying and doesn't contain deep mechanics to master is quite a lot to ask. But it's not just the length that's the issue. Firewatch, probably the game Nuts most resembles, costs the same and only lasts for a couple hours more. However, Firewatch possessed something far more integral to a mystery game than simply playtime. It concluded every mystery and every narrative element that it needed to, and this is exactly where Nuts falls short, both as a mystery game in general, and as a game that's value for money considering its pretty steep price tag. And even though the game's 5 years old at this point, I should say major spoiler warning for Firewatch coming up. At Firewatch's bittersweet conclusion, you've managed to find the truth behind everything that's been happening in the forest. You know why the government camp has been apparently mysteriously recording your conversations, and you know the identity of the figure who's been stalking you throughout the game. The ending does leave certain things open though, and not everything is wrapped up neatly. You don't know if Henry and Delilah will ever meet, you don't know what's going to happen between Henry and his dementia-stricken wife, and the general direction of his life from this point is still left very ambiguous. However, these aren't the mysteries the game set out to solve. They're character and narrative elements that the game explores, and their not being concluded only adds to the melancholic nature of Henry's personal journey. Things aren't always concluded, answers aren't always found, and there aren't always entirely happy endings for us. Life just sort of moves on at the end of the day. In Nuts, there are crucial story elements the game introduces that just remain conspicuously unresolved at the end. While one major thread does have a satisfying and pleasant conclusion, this is only one of several. The others are either left as cliffhangers or just dropped entirely. Midway through the game, it seemed like things were ramping up in one particular direction, but then I looked at the stage select screen and I saw that there was only room for another 2 stages, which the game then didn't use to explore the mysteries I thought we were going to solve. What's more confusing is that the game wraps up without any intention of tackling said mysteries. It doesn't feel like the answers have been, I don't know, blatantly cut from the final game due to a lack of time. Even if in reality that might have been the case, the narrative addresses the fact that these plot threads won't be solved. So I don't know what else to conclude other than they just weren't meant to be. Where Firewatch left bits of its story unresolved, the lack of resolution wasn't a glaring absence, and in fact made the story and characters feel so much more impactful as a result. In Nuts, the lack of resolution just makes the narrative feel unfinished. Even though Nuts has a unique gameplay mechanic at its core, the point of the game still very much revolves around the story and its mysteries, and if you're playing a story-focused game, you kind of expect the story to be resolved, right? If I was paying £15 for a story-focused game, and I did, I would especially expect the story to be resolved, and this is what the value thing ultimately comes back to. While the game's short length is a mark against the value you get for the steep price tag, what's worse is you're also paying for a story that doesn't conclude all the plot threads it needs to. So, as a result, I came away feeling like I'd been kinda shortchanged. So ultimately, that was my experience with Nuts. The game and mechanics were pretty fun and had a lot of promise and potential. While I didn't regret my time playing, I did feel as though there were a lot of bits missing that I would expect to have in the game considering how much it cost. That said, if you're fine with paying the cost, or if it's ever on sale, maybe give it a go. It did get me thinking how good the mechanics would be in something like a horror game, where your survival could be linked to how well you can work out the monster's paths by recording and outsmarting them. Playing Nuts was a little creepy at first, honestly. Maybe it's something about watching recordings that puts people of my generation, who grew up with not only the internet but also jump scares, on edge. It's something the developers clearly realised as well. On the itch.io page for the Game Jam prototype, there's even a note saying that there are absolutely no jump scares. Harnessing that sensibility and injecting it into a horror game would be pretty effective, I think. Speaking of the itch.io demo, I've put a link to it in the description if you guys wanted to try out the core mechanics of the game yourselves. You might find it a neat little preview. And that's it. Thanks for watching, everyone. I found it fun to write and record this review, even if it is only a review and I kind of wanted to get away from doing those. I think I'll keep doing more of these for mainly indie games or games that haven't really got the spotlight that they really kind of deserve. So I hope you continue to enjoy these videos and I'll speak to you later.